Dear child, today is not an ordinary day. There is a reason these words have found you at this exact moment. Somewhere, beyond everything you can currently see, a private decision has already been made. No one announced it. No family gathering celebrated it. No public message revealed it. Yet the spiritual atmosphere surrounding your future has already begun to change. What happened behind closed doors was never supposed to reach your ears this soon. But the truth has a way of finding those whose hearts are ready to receive it. Don't skip. Listen carefully. There is a person you have never fully met in the way destiny intended. This is the one who has unknowingly carried questions about love, trust, and the future for far longer than anyone realizes. For many nights they wrestled with silent thoughts, wondering whether they should continue following the path others had chosen for them or whether they should finally listen to the quiet voice inside their own heart. They smiled in front of people, yet behind those smiles they carried confusion that no one noticed. Family members assumed they already knew what they wanted. Friends believed they had everything under control. But deep inside, they were searching for one answer they could never seem to find. Then something unexpected happened. A conversation ended differently than anyone expected. A simple sentence spoken by someone close to them stayed in their heart long after everyone else forgot about it. That one sentence became impossible to ignore. It made them question every plan they had accepted without thinking. Suddenly, they were no longer making decisions to satisfy others. They began asking themselves a different question. What if the life meant for me has not arrived yet? That question opened a door no one else could see. From that moment forward, they quietly stepped away from the pressure surrounding them. They stopped agreeing too quickly. They stopped pretending they felt certain. They began protecting a part of their heart that they had never protected before. No one understood why they suddenly became quieter. Some people even accused them of changing. But the truth was far deeper than anyone imagined. They had made a private decision. Not because someone forced them. Not because they were afraid. But because, for the first time, they felt that rushing toward the wrong future would be the greatest mistake of their life. Don't skip. The remarkable part is that they never spoke your name. They may not even know who you are today. Yet somehow, every choice they made started creating space for the person destiny had always intended to bring into their life. Every delay became protection. Every canceled plan became preparation. Every unexpected disappointment became another step guiding them toward the future that had already been written long before either of you understood it. People around them noticed little changes. They spent more time alone. They became more thoughtful. They refused opportunities that once seemed perfect. When questioned, they simply smiled and said, "Something doesn't feel right." No one realized that those words were the beginning of an entirely different story. There were moments when they almost ignored that feeling. There were moments when they nearly accepted a path simply because everyone expected them to. Yet each time they came close, something unexpected interrupted the situation. Plans shifted. Conversations changed. Timing failed. Doors quietly closed without explanation. At first, those events felt frustrating. Later, they realized those interruptions were protecting them. While everyone else believed life was delaying their happiness, destiny was carefully rearranging every detail so that two separate journeys would one day meet at exactly the right moment. Even now, there are people who cannot understand why certain chapters in your own life unfolded the way they did. You have questioned delays. You have wondered why some relationships ended before they truly began. You have searched for meaning inside moments that only brought confusion. But what if those unanswered questions were connected to a decision someone else quietly made without ever knowing your name? Think about that for a moment. While you were learning patience, someone else was learning courage. While you were healing from disappointment, someone else was walking away from a future that no longer felt right. While you believed nothing was changing, everything was already changing behind the scenes. This private decision was never meant to impress anyone. It carried no applause, no celebration, no public announcement. It simply changed the direction of two lives at once. And the most astonishing part has not even happened yet. The silence that followed that private decision confused everyone around them. Days turned into weeks, and people who once believed they understood your future spouse suddenly realized they no longer knew what was happening inside their heart. Questions began to grow. Why are you changing? Why are you delaying everything? Why won't you give us a final answer? Each question sounded simple, but none of them reached the real reason. Your future spouse had already crossed a line that very few people ever dare to cross. They decided that they would rather disappoint the expectations of the world than spend the rest of their life living a future that never truly belonged to them. Don't skip. Every morning they woke up carrying a strange sense of peace mixed with uncertainty. They could not explain it. They did not have every answer. They did not know what tomorrow would bring. But they knew one thing with absolute certainty: they could no longer pretend. That realization became stronger with each passing day. The people closest to them believed they were simply becoming stubborn, but what looked like stubbornness from the outside was actually courage growing quietly within them. There came a moment when someone placed another opportunity in front of them. On paper it looked perfect. The timing seemed right. The families approved. Friends smiled with excitement. Everyone assumed the decision would finally be made. Yet while everyone else celebrated too early, your future spouse felt an unexpected heaviness inside their heart. They smiled politely, thanked everyone for their kindness, but later that evening they sat alone, unable to ignore the feeling that something important was still missing. That night they looked out into the darkness and whispered words no one else heard. If the person meant for me truly exists, don't let me make the wrong decision. Those words were never spoken loudly, yet they carried extraordinary weight. It was not a demand. It was not impatience. It was a quiet surrender. From that moment onward, life began moving in ways they could never have predicted. The very next week, unexpected delays appeared again. Meetings were postponed without explanation. Conversations that were supposed to settle everything suddenly ended without conclusions. Small misunderstandings became large obstacles. People called it bad luck. Others blamed poor timing. But your future spouse noticed something unusual. Every obstacle appeared at exactly the moment they were about to commit to something their heart had never fully accepted. Slowly, they stopped seeing delays as disappointments. They started seeing them as protection. Don't skip. Meanwhile, something was changing inside you as well, even if you could not see the connection. Experiences that once felt painful were quietly shaping your character. Moments of loneliness were teaching patience. Unexpected endings were making room for new beginnings. Every lesson, every tear, every unanswered question was preparing you for a chapter that neither of you could yet imagine. The remarkable part is that your journeys remained completely separate, yet they were beginning to move in perfect rhythm. When your future spouse took one step away from the wrong path, circumstances in your own life also shifted. When they chose patience instead of pressure, new opportunities quietly appeared around you. Neither of you understood why certain doors opened while others closed. Yet destiny was arranging both stories with incredible precision. There were evenings when your future spouse almost gave up on waiting. Friends told them they were wasting time. Relatives insisted that opportunities like these would never come again. Some even questioned whether they were making a terrible mistake. Those opinions hurt more than anyone realized. For a brief moment, doubt entered their heart. What if everyone else is right? That single question nearly changed everything. But just as uncertainty began to grow, something unexpected happened. A conversation with an elderly person, a forgotten memory, and an unexpected feeling of calm reminded them why they had chosen this path in the first place. It was as though life itself whispered, "Hold on a little longer." So they did. They waited. Not because waiting was easy, but because rushing no longer felt right. People misunderstood their silence. Some called them confused. Others assumed they were afraid of commitment. Very few realized they were protecting a future they had not yet seen. They were making space for someone whose arrival would eventually answer questions they had carried for years. That someone was always meant to become an unforgettable part of their story. And although your paths have not fully crossed yet, invisible threads are already pulling both of you closer than either of you realizes. The decision that began in silence is about to create consequences no one expected, because someone very close to your future spouse has quietly started noticing changes that can no longer be ignored. And what they discover next will leave the entire family questioning everything they thought they knew. The first person to notice the change was not a close friend, nor was it someone who spoke with your future spouse every day. It was a quiet family member who had spent years observing more than speaking. They watched the small details that everyone else overlooked. They noticed the thoughtful pauses before every answer. They noticed that your future spouse no longer smiled at conversations about marriage the way they once had. Most importantly, they noticed that every time someone tried to pressure them into making a final commitment, their eyes drifted into the distance, as though they were waiting for something they could not yet explain. Don't skip. One evening, after another family discussion about the future had ended, that relative gently asked a question no one else had dared to ask. Are you waiting for someone? Or are you waiting for the right moment? The room became completely silent. Your future spouse did not answer immediately. They lowered their eyes, took a slow breath, and simply replied, I don't know who that person is. But I know I shouldn't settle for less than what my heart keeps telling me. Those few words changed everything. For the first time, someone understood that this was not fear, stubbornness, or uncertainty. It was conviction. It was the quiet confidence that a life-changing connection was still ahead, even if they could not yet see it. From that day on, the atmosphere inside the family slowly began to change. A few people still encouraged them to move forward quickly, but others started to wonder if there really was a reason behind every unexpected delay. They began looking back at the strange events of the past several months. Every canceled meeting, every postponed conversation, every opportunity that disappeared at the last minute. One by one, those moments no longer looked like failures. They looked like protection. Meanwhile, your own life continued moving through unexpected seasons. There were days when you questioned whether your efforts mattered. You wondered why certain opportunities slipped away just when they seemed within reach. You asked yourself whether life had forgotten you. What you could not see was that your story and your future spouse's story were moving closer with every passing day. Neither path was random. Every disappointment was quietly redirecting both of you toward the same destination. Don't skip. Then came a night that your future spouse would never forget. Unable to sleep, they sat alone with a notebook that had remained untouched for months. Without planning to, they began writing down the qualities they hoped their life partner would have. They did not write about appearance, wealth, or status. Instead, they wrote about kindness during difficult times. They wrote about honesty when the truth was uncomfortable. They wrote about loyalty that remained steady even when life became uncertain. They wrote about someone who could bring peace instead of confusion. When they finished, they looked at the page for several minutes, then they whispered something that surprised even them. I hope this person is being prepared too. They had no idea that somewhere else, another life was also being shaped by unexpected experiences, difficult lessons, and moments of quiet growth. They could not see your journey, yet their heart somehow believed it existed. Over the following days, more unusual things began happening. Invitations they once expected never arrived. New opportunities appeared from completely unexpected directions. Random conversations seemed strangely meaningful. Even people who barely knew them started saying things like, "You seem different lately." Your future spouse smiled politely each time, but deep inside they knew something was changing. Not around them. Within them. The pressure that once controlled every decision slowly disappeared. In its place came an unshakable peace that no explanation could fully describe. They stopped chasing approval. They stopped comparing their timeline with everyone else's. They stopped believing that waiting meant losing. Instead, they began believing that timing could be one of life's greatest gifts. And that belief would soon be tested in a way no one expected. Because a message was about to reach someone in their family. It was not a dramatic announcement or a shocking confession. It was a quiet piece of information that seemed insignificant at first. Yet hidden within that message was one detail that would force everyone to reconsider every decision made so far. The moment that message is opened, the private decision your future spouse made in silence will no longer remain a secret. And the person who reads it first will be left asking one unforgettable question. What if we've been standing in the way of the future that was always meant to happen? Morning arrived with an unusual stillness, but no one inside your future spouse's family realized that the day would quietly become a turning point. The message that had arrived the previous evening remained unopened on a table, almost forgotten among ordinary conversations. It looked completely harmless. There was nothing dramatic about it. No urgent warning. No bold announcement. Yet sometimes the smallest messages carry the greatest consequences. Don't skip. As the family gathered for breakfast, that same thoughtful relative noticed the unopened message and casually picked it up. "Should I open this?" they asked. Your future spouse nodded without giving it much attention. They believed it would be another ordinary update, another conversation that would soon be forgotten. But it wasn't. The moment the message was read, the room grew unusually quiet. It wasn't because the words were shocking. It was because they reminded everyone of something they had ignored for far too long. The message spoke about patience. It spoke about decisions made under pressure often becoming lifelong regrets. It encouraged the reader not to confuse urgency with destiny and reminded them that the right future never needs to be forced. One sentence echoed through the room long after the message had been finished. The life meant for you will never require you to betray the peace inside your heart. No one spoke for several moments. Your future spouse slowly looked down, realizing those words perfectly described the reason behind every private decision they had made during the past several months. For the first time, no one argued. No one tried to persuade them. Instead, everyone began reflecting on their own actions. Had they been pushing too hard? Had they mistaken fear for wisdom? Had they almost led someone they loved toward a future that was never truly theirs? Don't skip. That afternoon, something remarkable happened. One family member who had always insisted on rushing every decision quietly walked over to your future spouse and said, if your heart is still telling you to wait, then wait. I'd rather see you happy years from now than regretful tomorrow. Those simple words lifted an invisible weight that had rested on your future spouse's shoulders for a very long time. They smiled, not because every problem had disappeared, but because they finally felt understood. Meanwhile, your own journey was entering a new season without you realizing it. Small opportunities began appearing where closed doors once stood. New conversations entered your life. Old disappointments slowly lost their power over you. It seemed ordinary on the surface, yet each small change was preparing you for a meeting that neither of you could schedule nor predict. The distance between your two stories was becoming smaller. Not through coincidence, but through preparation. Every lesson you had learned, every delay your future spouse had accepted, every unexpected change in both of your lives had been shaping two people who would one day recognize each other, not because everything had been easy, but because both had learned the value of waiting for what truly mattered. As evening approached, your future spouse stood alone beneath the quiet sky. There was no certainty about dates, places, or names. Yet for the first time in many months, they no longer feared the unknown. Instead, they whispered a quiet promise to themselves. When the right moment arrives, I will recognize it with peace, not pressure. At that exact moment, without either of you knowing it, another unexpected event quietly began unfolding, one that would soon bring your separate paths closer than ever before. Because somewhere, someone who knows a small piece of both stories is about to make a decision of their own. A decision that could become the first visible step toward the future that has been waiting for both of you all along. The following week began like every other, yet beneath the surface, everything was different. Neither you nor your future spouse could see the quiet movement taking place behind the scenes. Life rarely announces its biggest turning points with loud celebrations. More often, they arrive through ordinary conversations, unexpected meetings, and small decisions that seem meaningless in the moment. This was one of those moments. Don't skip. The person who quietly knew a small part of both stories could no longer ignore what they had noticed. For months they had watched your future spouse refuse opportunities that looked perfect on paper. They had also heard about someone described as kind, patient, resilient, and deeply genuine. Although they did not know every detail, something inside them kept whispering that these two separate stories were somehow connected. Instead of speaking immediately, they decided to observe a little longer. They watched how your future spouse reacted whenever the future was discussed. There was no excitement about rushing into a commitment. There was no bitterness about the past either. There was simply a calm confidence that the right chapter would arrive at the right time. That quiet confidence answered more questions than any explanation ever could. One evening, this person finally sat down with your future spouse and asked, if you could choose between certainty today or the right person tomorrow, which would you choose? Without hesitation came the answer. I would rather wait for the right person than spend a lifetime wondering what might have been." The room fell silent. There was no dramatic speech after that. No emotional argument. Only a peaceful understanding that some decisions are worth protecting, even when the whole world tells you to hurry. Don't skip. From that day forward, the atmosphere around your future spouse changed completely. Family members who once pushed them forward began encouraging patience instead. Friends stopped questioning every delay. Even those who had doubted their decision admitted there was something different about the peace they now carried. For the first time in a long while, your future spouse no longer felt alone. Meanwhile, your own life continued unfolding in unexpected ways. Small moments that once seemed random now began fitting together like pieces of a much larger picture. A missed opportunity led to a new beginning. An unexpected conversation opened a door you had never considered. Every experience seemed to be guiding you toward a destination that still remained just beyond the horizon. Neither of you knew the other's name. Neither of you knew where the other was. Yet both of you were becoming the people you needed to be before your stories could truly meet. As the days passed, your future spouse found themselves thinking less about timelines and more about purpose. They realized that real love could never be built on pressure or fear. It had to grow from honesty, trust, and peace. That realization transformed them from the inside out. One afternoon, while organizing old papers and forgotten memories, they came across a handwritten note they had almost thrown away months earlier. It contained a single sentence they had written during one of their most uncertain nights. "Don't settle because you're afraid of waiting." They smiled. What had once been written in doubt was now becoming a personal promise. Don't skip. That evening, the same relative who had quietly supported them from the beginning noticed something remarkable. The worry that had once filled your future spouse's face had disappeared. In its place was quiet hope. Not hope based on wishful thinking. Hope built on patience. Hope strengthened by faith. Hope that refused to disappear simply because the journey had taken longer than expected. The relative gently smiled and said, "Sometimes the greatest blessings arrive only after we've learned not to chase them." Those words stayed in your future spouse's heart long after the conversation ended. As night fell, they looked toward the stars and whispered one final thought. "I don't know when our paths will cross. But wherever you are, I hope you're finding the same peace I've finally found." They never imagined that, at almost that exact moment, circumstances beyond anyone's control were beginning to align in a way that neither family could have predicted. A chance encounter, a forgotten connection, and one unexpected introduction were about to bring two separate journeys closer than ever before. The private decision that began in silence was no longer changing just one life. It was quietly preparing two futures to become one. Several days passed, and life continued to appear completely ordinary. Cars filled the streets, families followed their routines, conversations came and went, and nothing seemed unusual to anyone watching from the outside. Yet beneath those ordinary moments, invisible pieces of a much larger story were finally beginning to connect. Neither you nor your future spouse realized that the season of preparation was slowly giving way to the season of movement. Don't skip. The unexpected introduction did not happen through a grand event or a carefully planned meeting. Instead, it began with a conversation between two people who had no idea how important their words would become. While discussing family, future plans, and life experiences, your future spouse's name came up naturally. A few moments later, another name entered the conversation. Yours. No one treated it as anything special at first. It was simply another name among many. Yet the person listening quietly paused for a moment. There is something familiar about this story, they said. That single sentence changed the direction of the conversation completely. Questions followed. Not rushed questions. Careful questions. The more they talked, the more surprising the similarities became. Both stories carried unexpected delays. Both journeys included difficult lessons. Both lives had been shaped by patience instead of pressure. Neither path had been easy, yet neither heart had completely given up on hope. The conversation ended, but one thought remained impossible to ignore. What if these stories were never separate to begin with? Don't skip. Meanwhile, your future spouse felt an unusual sense of anticipation they could not explain. Nothing dramatic had happened that day, yet they woke up with the feeling that life was quietly preparing to open a new chapter. Instead of feeling anxious, they felt peaceful. Instead of searching for answers, they focused on becoming the best version of themselves. They spent more time appreciating simple moments. They became kinder to people who misunderstood them. They forgave those who had pressured them in the past. They released old disappointments that had quietly weighed on their heart. Without realizing it, they were making room for something new. That same evening, the relative who had supported them from the very beginning smiled and said, "I've never seen you this calm before." Your future spouse replied with words that surprised even themselves. "I stopped trying to control tomorrow. If the right person is truly part of my future, I don't need to chase what is already meant to find me." Those words carried a quiet confidence that could not be manufactured. It came only after months of uncertainty, patience, and personal growth. Don't skip elsewhere. Your own life was also changing in ways that seemed small but would later prove significant. Habits were changing. Priorities were changing. The things that once seemed important no longer held the same power over you. New opportunities encouraged you to become stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than you had been before. Looking back, you would one day realize that every delay had quietly been preparing you for this very season. Nothing had been wasted. Not the waiting. Not the disappointments. Not the unanswered questions. Every experience had shaped your heart for what was coming next. As another week came to an end, the person who had heard both stories made a quiet decision of their own. They would no longer remain a silent observer. They believed the time had finally come to help two separate journeys move one step closer together. Not by forcing anything. Not by creating false expectations. But by opening a door that had never been opened before. With great care, they reached for their phone and began writing a thoughtful message. They read it several times before pressing send. For a brief moment, they hesitated. Then they smiled. "This feels right," they whispered. The message was sent. It traveled silently through the night, carrying no dramatic announcement and no impossible promises. Yet hidden inside those few simple words was the beginning of a connection that neither you nor your future spouse had expected. By sunrise, someone important would read that message. And the answer they give could become the first real step toward the future that has been quietly waiting for both of you all along. Morning arrived with a quiet sense of expectation. The message that had been sent the night before was finally opened. The person reading it paused after every sentence, not because the words were complicated, but because they carried an unusual sense of sincerity. There was no pressure, no attempt to force events, and no promise that everything would happen immediately. It simply invited people to remain open to the possibility that sometimes the best chapters begin only after we stop trying to control every page of the story. Don't skip. As the conversation continued, something remarkable happened. Instead of asking, "How quickly can this happen?" everyone began asking, "Is this truly the right direction?" That single change in perspective transformed everything. For months, decisions had been driven by deadlines, expectations, and outside opinions. Now they were being guided by wisdom, patience, and genuine peace. Your future spouse quietly listened as those around them spoke with a calm they had never experienced before. For the first time, no one tried to rush the future. No one insisted that every answer had to come immediately. The pressure that had once surrounded every discussion had completely disappeared. Your future spouse smiled, not because every question had already been answered, but because they finally realized something that changed their heart forever. The right future never needs fear to keep it alive. Real love does not grow through panic. True commitment is never built upon pressure. The strongest relationships begin when two people have first learned how to stand peacefully on their own. That realization became the greatest gift of the entire journey. Don't skip. Looking back, every delay suddenly made sense. The opportunities that disappeared had protected them. The closed doors had redirected them. The painful waiting had built patience. The difficult seasons had created maturity. Nothing had been meaningless. Every unexpected twist had quietly prepared both of your lives for a future that would arrive at exactly the right time. Your future spouse stepped outside as the evening sky filled with light. A gentle breeze moved through the air, and for the first time in many months, there was no anxiety about tomorrow. only gratitude. With a peaceful heart, they whispered softly, "Wherever you are, I hope life is preparing you with the same care that it has prepared me. When the time is right, we won't meet by accident. We'll meet because every lesson, every delay, and every decision has brought us exactly where we are meant to be." Those words carried no desperation, only hope. No fear, only faith in the journey ahead. And perhaps that is the greatest message of this story. Sometimes the biggest breakthrough is not the moment two paths finally cross. Sometimes it is the moment both people become ready for that meeting. If you are still walking through a season of waiting, do not believe that nothing is happening. Growth often takes place in silence. Strength is usually built where no one is watching. The chapters that feel slow today may become the very reason tomorrow's blessings remain strong. So keep moving forward with courage. Keep choosing wisdom over pressure. Keep protecting your peace. The future is not shaped by rushing toward the unknown. It is shaped by becoming the person you were always meant to be. And when the right chapter finally opens, you will understand that every unanswered question, every unexpected delay, and every quiet decision was leading you toward a future far better than you could have imagined. Thank you for being part of this journey. Sometimes the most meaningful endings are really the beginning of an entirely new story.